development and longtime Street Fighter competitor David Sterling, and an update to Marvel vs. Capcom 2 that would feature online multiplayer. But one of the strangest announcements to come from this rush of new fighting games from Capcom was one that was announced for the PC. Street Fighter Online Mouse Generation was a fighting game designed by Capcom subsidiary Deleto in association with Revoltech and released only for the PC where its mouse was used for combat. The characters in the game were also customizable to an extent. The game only featured a handful of Street Fighter characters, while the rest of the roster consisted of characters based on the works of Wuxia novelist Louis Shaw, the Rival School series, the anime and manga Cyborg 009, and other various sources. As if the game's control scheme wasn't off-putting enough, the game featured an unappealing art design and was only released in Japan. Despite attempts to prolong the game's value by releasing downloadable content featuring chocolate avatars and a President Obama clone, Street Fighter Online Mouse Generation had its game service shut down and go offline at the end of August 2009. Once Street Fighter 4 began an open beta test in arcades, many fans were relieved to hear that not only did Street Fighter 4 play really well, but it felt like a Street Fighter game. Many people's opinion on the game changed from being doubtful to overwhelmingly positive in anticipating its arrival. Leading up to its release, Capcom slowly introduced more characters that would be joining the final roster. Along with the 12 original fighters from Street Fighter 2, there were 4 new characters initially added to the roster. Crimson Viper was a female American spy that was capable of having superpowers through the suit she was wearing. Her character design was based on Capcom's research to create a character aimed toward American players. Abel was a French martial artist of the Sambo combat style that suffered from amnesia. El Fuerte was a masked Mexican luchador who was also an aspiring chef. Finally, Rufus was an obese fighter that used his size and weight to his advantage in combat. The new boss character for Street Fighter 4 was Seth, a mysterious and powerful figure that was named after Seth Killian. In keeping with Street Fighter tradition, Akuma returned as a secret final boss and unlockable character. The other secret character was a hidden figure constantly mentioned in Street Fighter's past that actually originated from a false rumor in the original Street Fighter 2. Back in 1991, when Street Fighter 2 first appeared in arcades, the game featured a mistranslated victory dialogue for the character Ryu. The dialogue read, "You must defeat Shang Long to stand a chance." This phrase was meant to refer to Ryu's Dragon Punch, which translated to Shoryuken in Japanese and Shang Long in Mandarin. So, to those who were unaware of this, Ryu sounded as if he was referring to a person instead of his signature move. The following year, the game magazine Electronic Gaming Monthly published an April Fool's joke that was presented as a hidden strategy to defeating the final boss, M. Bison. If M. Bison was defeated under incredibly challenging conditions, the player would be able to unlock Shang Long, the game's true final boss. This infamous joke would go on to be spread as fact among the gaming community. When Street Fighter 2 came to the Super Nintendo, Capcom had to fill out some of the characters' backstories and gave more credibility to the joke when it referred to Shang Long as Ryu and Ken's master. In 1993, a manga adaptation of Street Fighter 2 was released, where Ryu and Ken's master is mentioned again as a character named Gouken, who was murdered by M. Bison. In 1994, when Akuma was introduced in Super Turbo as an actual hidden playable character and final boss, he was described as the younger brother of Gouken. He also featured many of the moves described in EGM's original April Fool's article. When this news and the methods of reaching him were revealed, many began speculating that this was Capcom's response to the joke. In 1995, when Capcom released Street Fighter the movie The Game in arcades and the Sega Saturn, Shang Long is referenced once again in 3 different endings as the master of Ryu and Ken and the brother of Akuma. In 2007, a former developer of the game posted on the Shoryuken forums that an actual character named Shang Long was originally intended to be part of the game, but was eventually removed due to Capcom's decision not to include him. Around 1995 and 1996, when Street Fighter Alpha 1 and 2 were released, Gouken's backstory was fleshed out once again. He and Akuma were apparently pupils of a martial artist named Gotetsu. Gotetsu taught them both an ancient assassination martial art. Akuma used this knowledge to create the Dark Hado power, while Gouken used it to create a style that was defensive and non-lethal. Akuma eventually killed his master Gotetsu as well as Gouken, but not before Gouken trained both Ryu and Ken. This backstory appeared once again, albeit slightly modified, in the DVD film Street Fighter Alpha Generations in 2005. Finally, in 2008, Capcom announced that Gouken would be making his debut as an unlockable and playable secret character in Street Fighter 4, and thus provide gamers with a bit of fan service in the form of a character born of a mistranslation, an April Fool's joke, and fanfiction. Street Fighter 4 finally arrived in Japanese arcades on July 18, 2008. Many fans and those in the press in Japan instantly loved the game and even considered it the best game of 2008. After nearly a decade, Street Fighter fans had an all-new game in the Street Fighter franchise to sink endless hours into playing at the arcades. Meanwhile, people in Europe and North America had to wait and hope for a local outlet in their area to import one of the arcade machines. After its arcade release in Japan, the anticipation in Japan and the rest of the world began for its console release. Capcom soon began development on all kinds of additional content to be included with Street Fighter 4's arrival on consoles. They teamed up with Mad Catz to produce specific controllers for Street Fighter 4, including a specially designed fight pad controller featuring various Street Fighter characters and 2 levels of arcade sticks. Not only would there be special edition controllers made for Street Fighter 4, but additional content for the game in the form of unlockable characters in addition to the original 19 from the arcade version. These bonus characters would consist of Super Street Fighter 2 veterans Cammy and Fei Long, as well as Street Fighter Alpha veterans Dan, Gen, Rose, and Sakura. For those who pre-ordered the collector's edition of Street Fighter 4, they would receive a comic book style mini strategy guide by Primal Games, a game soundtrack, miniature figurines of Ryu and Crimson Viper, downloadable content in the form of bonus costumes, and an original animated film. Street Fighter 4 The Ties That Bind was a film co-produced by Capcom and the animation company Studio 4 Degrees Celsius. It portrayed the events that took place right after the Street Fighter 2 storyline that would lead into the Street Fighter 4 storyline. M. Bison was defeated and the organization of Shadaloo has supposedly fallen. However, abnormal discharges of energy have occurred around the world, leading Cammy and her team to investigate these disturbances. Chun-Li and Guile have teamed up again to investigate the mysterious disappearances of the top martial artists around the world. Ryu continues to wander around the world struggling to contain the Satsui no Hado within him. Ken has put aside his training in order to focus on his family business and take care of his wife Eliza, though he longs for the days when he trained with his friend Ryu. Meanwhile, a new menace emerges in the form of Seth, the CEO of a weapons manufacturer named SIN. His organization is working on a new superweapon known as the Bleeze Project, which stands for Boiling Liquid Expanding Cell Explosion, and he believes that the power contained within Ryu Satsui no Hado is the key to its completion. In order to track down Ryu, Seth hires Crimson Viper to find him and force him to unleash this power for their benefit. But unbeknownst to Seth, Crimson Viper is actually an undercover agent working for the CIA, and her true intent is to monitor and bring down SIN. Street Fighter 4 The Ties That Bind served as a good film for fans who wanted more backstory to go with the game's original plotline, even though overall nothing really felt accomplished by the end of it. Still, the movie was intended to be pure fan service and merely flesh out the story in Street Fighter 4 for those who desired it, and in that sense, it served its purpose. Street Fighter 4 arrived on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in February 2009. The game was met with high praise by the fans and great reviews overall from the press. Street Fighter 4's gameplay succeeded where Street Fighter 3 failed for some by having a system that was easy to learn for newcomers while having enough complexity, depth, and variety for fans and veterans to enjoy. As far as the game's visuals go, the 3D approach proved to be successful as Street Fighter 4 featured amazing animations from the characters and backgrounds that couldn't be done as well with just high-res 2D sprites. The same could be said for the high level of detail and finesse seen throughout the game's visuals. There was a solid online multiplayer mode that offered profile customizations, various stat trackers, and arcade-style matchmaking. Despite the occasional nitpick that could be found with the game, such as the mediocre anime cutscenes and the final boss coming off very cheap and frustrating, there weren't a lot of substantial complaints to be had with the game. It could easily be seen that Capcom and DIMS considered the game a labor of love. They understood the challenge of living up to the franchise's legacy and saw the production through to as close as perfection as possible without any major compromises. It ultimately succeeds because it manages to maintain the feel of the old Street Fighter games without feeling dated and brings in new and fresh ideas. Not only did Street Fighter 4 live up to the Street Fighter name, but it stands as a worthy addition to its legacy. A piece